Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bible Basics with Pastor Steve. If you would like to receive a copy of the scriptures that we're going to be looking at each week, please be sure to send me an email at the email address listed there in the corner of the video. And I'm not sending you a traditional Bible translation of the scriptures we're going to be looking at. I'm always sending a paraphrasing that I have put together to make the story a little bit easier to understand. Hello, Barbara. Good to have you here this evening. If you've logged in, and several of you have, please say hi to everyone. Hey, there's Tracy. Good evening. And there's Charles. Hello there to you, too. So tonight we're going to be talking about God's justice. We started on this a little bit last week when we talked about the Ten Commandments. We're now going further into the law there in the book of Exodus. And the portion of scripture that I sent out is basically, I selected various laws to send out to you. I didn't send you everything that was in those chapters. I weeded through it and picked out the things that I wanted to talk about tonight. Certainly it's all important and good to read, but I wanted to focus on some key things about God's justice. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to open with prayer in just a minute. I do have a little bit of new stuff to talk to you about afterwards. None of it is Methodist tonight. Well, I guess it affects Methodists, or I wouldn't share it. But at any rate, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so we are looking at Exodus chapters 21, 22, and 23 tonight. And once again, we're not going straight through. I have pulled out various things that we're going to be focusing on. So let's begin, shall we? Anyone who mortally wounds someone will be executed. If it was an accident, he can flee to a place I will choose to be a sanctuary. But if it was premeditated, the killer must be executed. Anyone who attacks their parents will be executed. Kidnappers will be executed. Anyone who curses their parents will be executed. If someone gets hit with a stone during a fight but recovers, the one who hit him will compensate him for his time and pay for his care. If two men are fighting and they accidentally injure a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, her husband is entitled to compensation by a judge. But if there is permanent injury, you will take a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, and a bruise for a bruise. If a bull kills someone, the bull will be killed, and its meat will not be eaten. The owner of the bull will not be held responsible. But if the bull had a history of violence, and the owner knew it and didn't secure it, the bull and owner will both be killed. If a thief steals an ox or a sheep, he will pay fivefold for an ox and fourfold for a sheep. If a thief is killed while breaking in at night, it's justified. But if it happens during the day, it is not. If a fire gets out of control and destroys crops or stored grain, whoever started the fire will make full restitution. Don't wrong or oppress an immigrant, because you were once immigrants in Egypt. Don't take advantage of widows or orphans. If you do, and they call out to me, I will hear them. I will be furious with rage, and I will make your wives and children widows and orphans. If you lend money to the poor, don't charge interest like a bank. If you take someone's coat as collateral, you must give it back before the night gets cold. If not, and he calls to me, I will hear him because I'm compassionate. Never spread lies, and don't conspire with others to commit perjury. Never follow the crowd when they're wronging someone. Never allow justice to be perverted in court by favoring either the powerful or the poor. If you find your enemy's ox or donkey roaming free, take it back where it belongs. If it's pinned down, help it break free even though you don't want to. Never accept a bribe. Bribes blind the eyes of judges and subvert the cause of the righteous. And there we go. And let's see. Hello, Stella. Good to have you here this evening. And hello, John. Good to see you too. So, I took a little bit more liberty than usual with the laws for the sake of, once again, having them flow easily in modern English and in a way that people would actually talk today. That's my goal with all of these, is to put it in language that people would actually use today. When I was picking through the laws and deciding which ones I would include and which ones I would set aside, I'll be honest, I set aside the ones that would be the most difficult to talk about and have the least bearing on things today. Now, before I explain any of that, let me just say that biblical law has had a profound impact on every justice system in the Western world, and today also in the Eastern world as well. There's simply no way to understate the there's no way to overstate the impact that laws like this have had, as you can see in it. And these are documents that are thousands of years old. There's already a distinction being made between what's justifiable and what's not, between bringing intentionality into it. Was it an intentional killing or was it an accidental killing? What were the circumstances, and the notion that you need to bring a judge in to interpret all of this. Why? Because prior to this, the way justice functioned was justice was carried out by families. Everybody had someone who was understood to be their redeemer. That's a word that is claimed by God in the Bible, but it was claimed by family relationships prior to that. And your redeemer was the person who was responsible for getting you out of a tight spot. If you had been kidnapped, your redeemer was responsible for coming after you. If you were murdered, your redeemer was responsible for avenging your death. So this law that we've just heard was brought into a world where justice was in the hands of private individuals, and the general rule was to avenge sevenfold. So if somebody from my family was murdered, or if I believed that they were murdered, and if I believed I knew who had done it, it was my obligation to avenge them sevenfold. So you killed one of mine, I killed 7 of yours. And of course, what that means is you get exponential growth of violence. Because avenging sevenfold, the goal would be to deter people from killing, but once that cycle starts, it's endless, because one of those 7 people, the families of one of those 7 people that got killed as a revenge, they're going to consider that to be an unjustified killing, and then they're going to, you see what I'm saying? Hello, Jerry. Welcome. Hello, Sandy. All right, so an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth sounds brutal by our standards today, but it was actually dialing back the degree to which you could get vengeance. Now, this Redeemer role does not end with this. It will continue on. It's just being tempered now. And why does it needs to continue on? Because, don't forget, we're talking about a people that are still in the wilderness. This is a nomadic people. They have no jails. They have no permanent structures of any kind. This is thousands of years before the first civilian police force. The first civilian police force was in London, England, right? Scotland Yard was the first civilian police force. Um, Prior to that, justice was carried out by militaries, and prior to that, it was carried out by families. So, given the fact that you don't have police, you don't have detectives, all you have is people bringing cases before judges, your options are very limited. You can get compensation, you can kill somebody. Beyond that, what are you going to do? If somebody is dangerous, so we would say today that not all of these offenses require the death penalty, but we can put people in jail. We can take them off the street. We can render them harmless. Um, we have, certainly our rehabilitation programs don't work all that well. They work better in the juvenile court system than they do in the adult court system, which is why it's tragic that they keep trying juveniles as adults. But they didn't have any of this stuff at their disposal. So if somebody was dangerous, what do you do with this person? And the answer is, if they're dangerous enough, you kill them. If they're not dangerous enough, you kick them out of camp and hope that they don't come sneaking back in the middle of the night to exercise their own judgment. All right, so you look at some of these laws and say, okay, well, but why does insulting your parents rise to that level, right? I mean, we've all been angered by our kids when they've insulted us, but we've also insulted our own parents, and we're pretty glad that they didn't have us executed. And there's not really any evidence to indicate that people were actually executed for insulting their parents, but it was in there because the family structure, remember, the family structure is the governmental structure, right? So, you've got Moses and all of the judges he has appointed. But beyond that, the administrative structure, such that there is one, is the tribal system. And a tribe is an extended family. And the tribe is divided up into clans, and the clans are divided up into households. So your family structure is your governmental structure. So when you speak out against your family, that would be like us today speaking out against the government system. And that can, of course, be quite serious. So that's why they have a different view of things than we do today. They lived in a very different world than we lived in, and we need to remember that. So which laws did I skip? Generally speaking, the laws that I skipped were laws that had to do with how slaves were handled. And I skipped it because it's difficult to explain, but it's also difficult to grasp listening to, and those were some of the longer portions in here. So let me try to summarize the portions that I skipped for you. Slavery in ancient Israel was not at all like modern day slavery. It was not at all like the slavery that the European colonies had. America was not the only place that had slaves during the colonial era. All of the colonies in the Americas had slave systems, and contrary to what John Wesley said, the American slave system was not the most brutal. That dubious distinction goes to the Spanish colonies. Their slaves were treated even worse than ours were. But that concept of chattel slavery was alien to the Hebrew people. Slavery as it existed in ancient Israel was more, for men anyway, was more like what we would today call indentured servitude. So if a person was sold into slavery, or there were various ways to become slaves. If you became a slave, you would only be a slave for 7 years. You could not be kept as a slave longer to that. And then at the end of 7 years, you would be given your freedom. And at that point, you would have to make a decision. Either you went off on your own, or in many cases, after living with a family for 7 years, they've gotten married to another one of the slaves, or even a family member, and they might not want to leave after that. So if at the end of 7 years, when their servitude was up, they had the option of permanently becoming part of the family, and they had a ritual for that. Now that was for men. For women, it was different for women. At the end of women were not set free, and the reason for that is kind of hard for us to get our heads around. Hello, Kayleen. Female slaves basically became part of the family. There was and there's kind of a blurry line between slave woman and wife. There's slave woman, there's concubine, there's wife, and all of them were acquired through cash transactions. So the assumption was, if you bought a woman, if a man, it was men buying the women. If you bought a woman, you bought her for a particular reason. And once you had done that, you were responsible for her. So in that world, turning somebody loose at the end of 7 years was not granting them freedom. It was putting them in a very precarious situation. So female slaves were considered to be part of the family and obligation of the family that had purchased them. They could be transferred if somebody else, her original family could purchase her back if the family that bought her didn't want her anymore, or somebody else could take her if she wanted to do that. But generally speaking, the expectation was, once you purchased her, you were responsible for her. But here's the thing: that entitled her to all the rights of everybody else in the family. Once you bought a woman, she was considered to be your daughter, if not your wife. Okay, so she had all of the legal protections and all of the family protections that any of your blood relatives had in the house. See, it's a very different thing. I'm not saying that it was a good thing. I'm saying that it's just difficult for us to get our heads around the way things were handled back then. So those were the parts that I skipped. So looking at the things that I did keep, I say this as if I'm creating my own set of laws here, and I'm not. I'm just trying to put together a narrative. I put together the ones I put together to give you an understanding of God's understanding of justice, because I think this gives you a glimpse into what God wants for the people and how people should be treating each other. So in the event that somebody killed somebody accidentally, it says they can flee to a sanctuary, is the word that I used. Once the people came into the land and settled and were no longer nomadic and started setting up the nation of Israel, they actually designated cities to be sanctuary cities. So if you accidentally killed someone, and the judge said, we believe that this is an accident, that did not mean that the family of the victim was going to let it go. They very well might come after you. So the sanctuary cities were places where people were considered hands off. So if I accidentally killed somebody, I could go to this sanctuary city and nobody could touch me while I was there. But if I left, then I was fair game again. Okay. Now, that's what this law is hinting at, which will come later. This is an earlier version of it when they were still nomads in the land. What else do I want to talk about? In our culture, the poorer you are, the higher the interest rate you pay because of risk assessment. God said to the ancient Israelites that the poorer they are, the less interest they pay. In fact, you shouldn't charge them interest at all. There's concern in here about judges being swayed by bribes or being swayed thinking that the concern that they'll feel sorry for the poor and they'll be biased in favor of the poor. Also, the opposite fear that they'll be influenced by people who have wealth and power, and that can't happen either. There's an acknowledgement that people don't always do the right thing. So, you know, if there's somebody you absolutely hate and you find that one of their animals has gotten loose, you know, it acknowledges you may be inclined to let that animal run wild, but you can't do that. You gotta try to help them get it corralled back in again. Or if you find the animal stuck somewhere, you might not care because it belongs to somebody you don't like, but that doesn't matter. You got to help them anyway. So it acknowledges that our instincts often run in the opposite direction for what needs to be done. We would not want to create this legal system for us today, but we need to remember that this legal system was a vast improvement over what they had at the time, and it set us on a course to a very different future. My New Testament professor, was it my New Testament? No, my Old Testament professor, said that when you look at the laws of the Old Testament, whether we're talking about Exodus or Deuteronomy, when we look at any of that, we should never be trying to recreate an ancient world order. The ancient world was not a great place. What we should be doing is looking at the way the order that God was putting in place challenged the order that was there before. Because in challenging the previous order, that's a change of course. So you should look at the trajectory that these laws were putting us on and asking yourself, if we continued on that trajectory, where would we be today? So in other words, when we look at an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, we don't say, hey, we should still do that today. No, we should say, hey, God was trying to limit that kind of stuff in the past, and we should be trying to limit it today as well. That's a faithful interpretation, looking at the entirety of the story and its setting as opposed to snapshots. We're not trying to recreate the tribal federation. We're trying to learn the lessons that it learned and applying them to our situation today. If you have any questions about any of that, feel free to email me. You can also, of course, always put the questions in the chat if you're not concerned about putting your name attached to them. You can just put them in there right now. So, speaking of the world today, read some articles today. One was by Thom Rainer. Thom Rainer, I've probably mentioned him before. Thom Rainer was the head of Lifeway, which is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, and so that was his job for a long time. And when he retired from there, he started his own consulting firm, and he self-publishes his books now as opposed to publishing them through Lifeway. And he writes articles about trends in Christianity, the Protestant world in general, and he's very concerned about small churches and the future of small churches. He's also very concerned, of course, about the decline of the Protestant denominations. And, you know, we've talked much and long about the decline of the mainline denominations, but, you know, we're really at a point now where it's all denominations in America are declining, even denominations that would not have been considered one of the mainline denominations, like the Southern Baptist Convention. You know, back in the 90s, when the Methodist Church was starting to decline in the United States, the Baptist Church was still growing in the United States, but it's not now. It's declining just as rapidly as everybody else is. And in the last couple of articles he's written, Thom Rainer has pointed out that everybody thinks of, whether you're a Christian, practicing Christian or not, when people think about church these days, they generally think about large churches. They think about large Roman Catholic churches. They think about large non-denominational, independent, evangelical churches. And he wants to remind everybody that here's the weird thing about that. Less than 8% of the churches in America have more than 200 people in them. But most Americans who go to church go to one of the churches in that 8%. So most churches are not big, but most people go to a big church. One of the interesting things that he has noticed is, okay, so the denominations continue to decline. The non-denominational churches continue to grow, but it is a net loss. Now, I've spoken with some non-denominational pastors, and certainly they would like to believe that their churches are growing because they're winning souls for Jesus. But the numbers are pretty clear on this, that the growth in the non-denominational churches is from two sources. One is that they have higher birth rates than the rest of America on average, so that's keeping up their numbers. And two, people are fleeing denominational churches and joining non-denominational churches. Now, most of the people who leave a denominational church don't end up going anywhere anymore, but the ones who do end up in a non-denominational church. And for decades, the source of new non-denominational Christians was mainline churches. That is no longer the case. Most of the people who are transferring to non-denominational churches now are coming from the Roman Catholic Church. So that is a change. But overall, the numbers are just going down, down, down. Meanwhile, so that was Thom Rainer. Leaving Thom Rainer behind, I saw another article that was actually a Market Watch, I believe, because it was economists that were looking at this, because there's a branch of economics, believe it or not, called religious economies. So whereas standard economics studies how people earn their livings, in a nutshell, that's not how people generally think of economics, but that's in fact what it is how people earn their livings and how people spend what they've earned. Religious economies studies, it's almost sociology. It studies the dynamics of people moving from one religious tradition to another, which traditions are growing, which are declining, and which people are not in one at all. And I'm sure that's why this paper was presented to economics publications as opposed to other sciences or religious groups. But at any rate, this study that was commissioned by was published by 3 different people from 3 different universities, found that there is a direct link between the decline in religion in America and the skyrocketing death rates of white middle-income Americans. This has been in the news a number of times, but for decades, the life expectancy of Americans was increasing every year, and it has stopped cold. Has not increased since before the pandemic now. And the reason for that is because one particular demographic, white middle-income people, are dying much younger now than they used to, and it's skewing all the rest of the numbers. And they are dying because of skyrocketing rates of what they call deaths of despair. Dying from suicide, opioid overdoses, problems related to alcoholism, and anything else that you would put into that general mix of untimely deaths due to depression or dangerous lifestyles. They call those deaths of despair. And the biggest hit demographic there, it's not just middle-income whites, it's middle-income whites who didn't go to college. Those are the ones who have really, their life expectancy has plummeted in the last 5 years. And what they discovered is that if you look at where those numbers have plummeted the most, the places where religiosity has declined the most are the places where the death rate has increased the most. And by religiosity, they don't mean belief, because most Americans still say they believe in God. They're talking about the practices, and they're not talking about prayer or spiritual disciplines either. They're talking about the practices of actually showing up somewhere on Sunday and the rest of the weekend being part of a worshiping body. The places where those numbers have stayed higher, the death rate has stayed lower. The places where people have been dropping out of church like crazy, that's where the death rate has skyrocketed. So there seems to, they were not able to find any other correlation in practice or in cultural, looking at cultural markers. They weren't able to find any other lifestyle change that correlated with these very high rates of deaths of despair. So people who are leaving religion are really suffering as a result of leaving religion. So, as we say in the church, people need Jesus. I know many people who have left say that we do nothing but harm. I'm not denying that we do harm. We absolutely do harm, but we also do a lot of good. In fact, people cannot live without us. I'll probably talk about those articles a little bit more on Saturday. For those of you who are Otterbein folk, we will be having our Vision Day on Saturday. Please gather here at 10. This is one of those days when we need all hands on deck, because we're going to be talking about the future of the life of the church, and this is your opportunity to be a part of that. It's kind of like, when it's election season, if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain afterwards about who got elected. Part of me thinks I shouldn't look at it that way, but part of me says I should absolutely look at it that way. I remember a situation some years ago where I had an important meeting about some changes that could or should have been made to one of the programs in one of my churches. Won't tell you which church or which program. But we had this meeting and we made some decisions. And then afterwards, somebody who did not attend the meeting was very upset by the decision was made. And this person said, I wish there had been a way for more people to be involved in that decision. And one person said, what do you mean, like coming to the meeting? And this person got really angry and said, look, I didn't know about this meeting. How did you tell people about this meeting? And I said, well, we talked about it in church every week for over a month. It was in the bulletin every Sunday for over a month. We mailed that bulletin out to everybody, whether they came to church or not, so everybody has a copy of it. It was also in the most recent edition of the church newsletter, asking people to come to this meeting. And this person's response was, well, I haven't been to church in months and I don't read anything you send me, so how was I supposed to know about the meeting? What I wanted to say but didn't say was, if you're that disconnected, I'm not sure you should have been involved in the decision anyway. Oh, and that's why I'm a bad pastor and a bad person. Although I think I'm right. Anyway. Man, the chat got real quiet. If you're an Otterbein person, please be here on Saturday. I'm hoping to be done by 2. We are going to order pizza and feed everybody. And I think we're going to have some sides in there too, a veggie tray or something like that. And I'll try to make a good pizza. Not just the cheapest stuff we can get, but we can decide on that as a group too. So I'm hoping to be done by 2. I'm told that that I'm being ambitious with that goal. But I guarantee you will find the day informative. I hope you will find the day productive, and I certainly hope you will find the day uplifting and full of hope. I am full of hope. So that's all I have for you guys tonight. And it is 8:35, and we're going to go ahead and sign out now with a word of prayer. Oh, Did I say hello to you, Kayleen? I don't know if I did. I don't remember if I did. Good evening, Kayleen. Good to have you here. All right, folks, let's go ahead and hello to all of you who watch tomorrow as well. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer, shall we? God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. All right, folks. God bless y'all. Have a good week, and I'll see you